Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Where does the time go? It only feels like a few hours since we last spoke. So, first of all, a big thank you for stopping by. And today, I want to explore the world of passwords or going passwordless. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that no matter where you're listening to this podcast, you're going to fit into one of a few camps. You either use the same password for absolutely everything, which is a risk because when one website gets hacked, every website has essentially been hacked. Or you have a handful of passwords that you use. Again, not ideal. Or you might be one of the good guys and girls by using a password manager such as LastPass to generate a secure password for every single site. And the bad news is, even if you're doing the latter, it's still not good enough. And that's before we arrive on the topic of two-factor authentication. So today I've invited Stina Herrensvard from Yubico onto the podcast because after recent announcements from Facebook and Twitter that seem to signal a growing support for secure keys as a mean for user protection, I wanted to find out more. So I've invited Stina on today to expand on this trend and talk about why this is an important step towards a truly passwordless future for us all. Now, Yubico has worked closely with platforms to support two-factor authentication based on physical security keys. And while Facebook users have been able to use the hardware to secure their accounts on desktops, the more recent announcement sees iOS and Android users now being able to do the same. But we've got a lot to talk about, a lot of scene setting, so buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to California so you can join me and Stina in conversation now. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
So my name is Stina Herrensvard. I have a background in industrial product design. And a few years ago, I was going to register to an online bank. And the bank said I would be secure with a username and a password and a software certificate that I downloaded on my computer. But I happened to know a white hat hacker who said it would take him one day to write the code that would empty my bank account. So with that knowledge, I called up the bank's customer service and told them about this risk. And I got this response: "Can you please tell your friend not to do that?" So, that was basically the reason that I and this white hat hacker who happened to be my husband and the father of my 3 children, we started a company with the vision of making secure login easy and available for everyone. And we named the company Yubico, which comes from the word ubiquitous. We wanted our technology and this vision to be everywhere. And 10 years ago, to realize this vision, we moved from Stockholm, where the company was founded, to Silicon Valley, where we are now, to work with the thought leaders of the internet and create a new global open standard for security.
What a great story. I love hearing stories like that and those moments of inspiration that made you start a company. But for people just listening and hearing about you for the first time, Yubico is the company that invented the YubiKey. But for anyone listening that are just hearing about you, can you set the scene and tell the listeners a little bit more about the kind of problems that you set out to solve with your technology and expand on that story that you shared?
So we have historically used passwords. And I don't think anyone using the internet today believe that they're secure. I think we hear about these breaches every day. 80% of all the breaches that hit the news headlines are due to stolen login credentials. And many of the attacks that we see, including ransomware, they actually start with someone stealing your password. So we cannot continue in a world with static passwords. So there is then other options. Those are called two-factor authentication. But historically, they've been, either a little too complicated and difficult to use, some bank authentication tokens where you need to retype a code, or, these card readers are actually really secure, smart cards, but then you need card, you need a reader, you need to download something on your computer, and you need a advanced, it's called certificate of authority model. So, the more secure are too complicated, password is not secure, and something in the middle are these, phone apps, SMS, and, push apps that have been okay until recently. So we tried to say, okay, how can we make something that's really secure and easy? And in order to do that, we actually had to develop a global standard, because that was the only way to make it really seamless. So we came up with an invention. We call it the YubiKey. It's a little USB key, and it has a little gold button on it, or like a touch sensor. You plug it into the computer and you touch this, or you tap it against your phone, and in that way you register your key to the account that you want to secure. And every time you use the key, it sends encrypted passcodes in a very tight way and a very secure way, so hackers can't get in. And then you can use the key across any number of services because of the standard we created. And the cool part, the way Google and Facebook and those who now adopted this, both our technology and the YubiKey and the standards that we created, is that once you register the key to an account, it just works. So we got something that's super secure and really easy to use.
And you said it's super secure, but I suppose the question I've got to ask is, has your husband been able to hack it yet?
No, he hasn't. I think that is, that's the ultimate, proof of, and we've got a few other, probably a few hundred, 1,000 hackers around the world trying to breach it, because we, the first company to adopt our technology at scale was Google. Wow. They made a study where they tested this key with other two-factor authentication technologies, and they could see that the push apps and the SMS codes and those, they were far better than just using a username and password. I would, any two-factor authentication is actually better than username and password, but they were not enough secure for the modern attackers, the more advanced attacks called man-in-the-middle attack or spear phishing. And then they tried the YubiKey, and they were, in a study of 350,000 users, there were 0 account takeovers. So that was actually the start for why it started to take off, because when Microsoft and Amazon and all the other tech giants here in this part of the world saw that study, they said, "Oh, we also want this." So that's basically the. But in order to make it really seamless, as I started saying, we needed integration directly into all the leading platforms and browsers. So it just works across all phones and computers and all the major services. And we're there now. 10 years of standards work.
Wow, what a cool story. And I love how your mission has always been just to simply make the internet a safer place for everyone. And you mentioned there that you'd partnered with tech giants such as Google, but I also believe you partnered with Microsoft as well to develop appropriate standards and realize that vision. So is there anything you can share around that, the work you did with Microsoft? I
mean, Microsoft was the other platform that joined after Google. Together with Google, we came up with we call it U2F, Universal Second Factor, and then we contributed these ideas to an organization called FIDO Alliance. And the initial design was you had a security key, like a YubiKey, and a password. And when Microsoft joined, they were the one to continue to work with us and really drive the effort to make it passwordless. So you no longer combine the key with a password. It just, we could use it with the biometrics. We could use the PIN. You could use it without anything, or you can use the password. You had the more options. And so we worked really closely with Microsoft in, further developing these standards effort. And along the way came Apple and Amazon and Bank of America, and Visa, and a few hundred other major companies who wanted to join our journey. But yes, with Microsoft, we actually recently did something very cool. And not only with Microsoft, but also with Google, we protected the U.S. election campaign with this technology. I think you're aware of that in 2016, Hillary Clinton, her assistant, one of her coworker, downloaded a PDF that contained a malicious code, a very basic form of phishing, the kind of phishing that we all have been educated not to do, but that changed the election outcome. So in 2020, there was major efforts here in the US that said, hey, this cannot happen again. We need to protect democracy. We need to protect election campaigns. And, what are the technologies that can do that? So both Google and Microsoft systems were being used for these election campaign workers, on both ends, both the Republicans and the Democrats. And our keys and our technology was then also used to stop the attackers. And there were attacks. There were attacks from several non-democratic countries, but they were not able this time to breach any emails, which is, one of my success stories.
And sticking with big tech, of course, Facebook and Twitter are also signaling growing support for security keys as a means for user protection. So I'm curious, what kind of trends are you seeing in the industry? And are you hopeful that we are close to achieving a genuinely passwordless future for all? I think it was Brett McDowell from the FIDO Alliance a few years ago on here. And that's the destination that we all want to get to, isn't it? Yes.
I mean, when Twitter and Facebook and these mainstream social media platforms make support for these standards, Brett from FIDO Alliance is, we are partners. As I said, we contributed our technology to FIDO, and we are the leading inventor behind the FIDO security keys and the FIDO U2F, FIDO 2 standards. So, we are very, very, happy to be on this journey. But going back to Facebook and Twitter are mainstream platforms that are used by billions of users. And when they start adopting this technology, you can understand that this is no longer for just enterprises and few privileged access users or high security applications like election campaigns, but it is actually for everyone. Twitter had a breach last year. I don't know if you heard about it, but it was actually in the news. It created quite big headlines, and they had a breach because they were using a basic two-factor authentication method, a phone app, which is the most common. But it's not secure enough today for the more advanced phishing attacks. The one, the man in the middle attacks, the spear phishing attacks, where the attacker hijacks a session in real time and takes over your account without you knowing anything. So you don't actually have to click on a link or download on a PDF. It's just there in your, in your browser, in your session to take your login credential and breach wherever you're going to log into. So after that, Twitter announced that they're now making support for FIDO security keys. Bank of America is in the process of making support for security keys, which is another mainstream platform. Facebook did it several years ago. So it's definitely coming. UK.gov was also one that has made support together with one of the identity providers that you can choose in UK. You can also log into, you can use the same key basically to log into your Facebook, to your Gmail, to your UK.gov account, which is cool.
I would imagine there's going to be more and more interest in this area as well, especially with things like cryptocurrencies, because I do know a lot of people that back up their two-factor authentication, again, using a phone app for huge investments of cryptocurrencies, because that is a big thing now too, isn't it?
All leading cryptocurrency exchanges have made support for FIDO security keys. So you can use a YubiKey there too. Absolutely. It is. There are two ways to secure your cryptocurrency. Either you can use an offline, called crypto wallet, but then if you lose that wallet, then your money is gone. So a lot of people, both for as a backup, but also for convenience and to get member points and all kind of thing, they're using these. So it's actually a trend to put your cryptocurrency in the cloud. But if you have it in the cloud, hey, you definitely need to secure it, because then suddenly you'll have access. A few million users can have access to your cryptocurrency. So there are trade-offs and opportunity to put it in the cloud. If you put it in the cloud and you use a security key, then you got the best of two worlds, and it's secure and it's convenient. You can access it anytime. You're not going to lose it. So that's the future.
And you mentioned Facebook and Twitter a moment ago. And one of the reasons I wanted to bring that back up is we will have people listening all over the world. And yes, they want to go passwordless, but they're probably intimidated by some technology and the terms, etc. So could you possibly share a use case of just how you're supporting two-factor authentication based on physical security keys with things like Facebook and Twitter? Is there anything you can share there just to bring to life what we're talking about and help people understand how it could work for them in their world?
Okay, I mean, going into the details, the Facebook's engineers, they wanted to implement strong two-factor authentication for the development environment. Yeah. They needed to scale to thousands of developers, and they decided to go with the YubiKey, and they deployed it for all their staff. And they also actually said you can use other authentication methods, but you have to be careful, because if the other authentication methods, if you want that as a backup, you will have to ensure that is secure, or the backup will be the weakest link. That's where the hackers will get in. So ideally, you want 2 keys per user, or you want another strong, backup method, which could be a smart card, which could be a little more complicated. Windows Hello actually has built in this FIDO technology directly into a Windows machine. It's also starting to be built in directly into Android phones and iPhones, which is almost as good security as external security key. Not as, but far better than a lot of other methods. And it will enable this vision to be ubiquitous. There are 4.7 billion internet users that need security. So, we want every person to be able to access it, either directly using their phone or using a YubiKey.
So, as you said, you're helping companies like Google to secure 85,000 plus of its employees against online fraud, and platforms such as gov.uk over here to protect the gateway against cyber criminals, and even within the UK government and defence departments, all again to secure their users. But are there any other use cases that you could share that just help listeners understand again where this could head? And because I would imagine you've created it for a particular purpose, but then there's going to be a lot of businesses contacting you with different use cases. Do you see it continuously evolving over the next few years?
We started to get traction within tech. Yeah. And the last couple of years, cryptocurrency and financial services has been, the most, the ones who have adopted it fastest. And now big government. I mean, I don't know if you're aware, but President Biden here in the US, he just put out an executive order, a big cybersecurity, mandate, or saying to protect this nation, we're saying, hey, we need to have better security, because this is our digital society today. It's all dependent on the internet. And in that executive order, it highlights the importance of two-factor authentication. For our technology, where it's heading is starting with tech, financial services, big government, services. The U.S. energy grid is partly now protected by this technology. We are also moving forward, and that's something that's very close to my own heart. We are securing journalists and dissidents around the world. So every month we give away about 1,000 keys to users at risk who may work in situation where a non-democratic country, don't want them to use their rights for free speech. And we then want to help them to be safe online. And we partner with several nonprofit organizations and organizations that work for protecting free speech and protecting a free open internet. And one of them is Freedom of the Press, that educates journalists and dissidents how to be safe online. As part of their program, they use the keys that we have donated to them. And there is a story that's very touching for me personally. But a few years ago, I got an email from a journalist in a non-democratic country who had set up a YubiKey with his Gmail account. And the email header that he sent to me was, "Thank you for protecting his life." And some of his coworkers had not protected their accounts, and they're no longer alive. And, that's real. That's just beyond enterprise and government. That's human lives.
That's such a powerful story. And I think everyone listening, those words will resonate. And also, I think most people will accept that we need to move on from passwords and find an alternative there. Nobody can remember 300 completely secure passwords for every account that they've got against their name. So I'm curious, though, what are the biggest challenges preventing us all from going passwordless?
We needed to create this standard.
Yeah.
And in order to, the standard was needed to make it really seamless. And there are still, a lot of services that haven't adopted the standard. So the more services, the more momentum. And now when it's starting to be built in directly into computers and phones, I think that is, one of the sort of the final, the last, mile on this journey, that when external security keys and built-in can work together, that's how we can scale this authentication technology to 4.7 billion internet users. So it's a combination of, the standards evolving, education. People are sitting and using passwords. Something we've been using for decades, and we don't really want to change until we realize we need to, or mandate from the government. So there are more and more services that are requiring you cannot log in unless you have two-factor authentication. Normally, or initially, most of those services are for enterprises, but there are financial services requiring that. And there will be more government service, and even some of the large, cryptocurrency and other will say, hey, we're not going to take responsibility if you're hacked, if you don't use it. So it's if I summarize it, education, standards involvement, and I would say compliance and government regulations. Just like the seatbelt. The seatbelt was developed in the 50s when there were no seatbelts in cars. There were basically no security in cars, and people, they died on the highways, and that inspired another innovator at Volvo, actually, to create the 3-point seatbelt and say, hey, this has to be simple. It has to be an open standard, it has to be everywhere. And then the seatbelt scaled to all cars. I think that is, and that was exactly the same journey. It has to be easy. It has to be a standard. And there has to be with compliance and government regulations. And people need to understand the importance of seatbelts. And eventually, you can't buy a car today if it's not secure, and you don't want to buy a car today if it's not secure. And I think that's where the internet and these secure standards will eventually evolve. It's just going to be there. We're not going to even think about it, but it's going to take a few more years. But eventually, I'm excited about the future.
And I'm glad you mentioned education there, because, of course, we are living in a world of clickbait headlines and misinformation. And I'm sure that when you're scrolling down news feeds and various online publications, you must come across a few myths and misconceptions that frustrate the hell out of you. So is there any myths and misconceptions we can finally lay to rest today, especially around going passwordless? Is there anything that springs to mind?
Yeah, it doesn't really help to have a unique, strong password for every site you log into, because it's still a static code. So It's far better to use unique, strong password for I'm not saying, but it's not good enough. And it's also far better to use a password manager that can store and manage these unique passwords for you. So I'm not saying it's it's a bad solution, but the myth is don't use passwords. So static password by itself is not secure. The other one is that all two-factor authentication, SMS, phone apps, security keys, like they're all the same. You can use any of them. That's not true. There are some that are more secure. The traditional smart cards and security keys are more secure. Then the third myth is that two-factor authentication and security keys are really complicated and people don't want to use it because it adds friction and then like time and but that's the beauty, that things actually can be integrated seamlessly, and as I mentioned, we've now, together with these large tech giants, we have created this standard that once you register the security key with an account, you don't necessarily need to use it again after the first login. You can just put it aside. And then you log in because there's a tight integration between the user, the browser, and the service. So the only time you will need to use the key again is when you move to another service. I'm not saying that all services have integrated this way, but that's the ultimate user experience. You log in with nothing, but you're still secure. And so two-factor authentication can definitely be easy, but it's a little time left to get there.
Yeah, there's a little time left to get there. And speaking of which, what is it that excites you about the future and where we're heading? Because that dream of going passwordless does seem to be getting closer. So what is it that excites you about where we're heading?
I believe that if we can trust our internet, this internet that was designed for sharing information, the most powerful tool for democracy and free speech, and if we can trust this internet, there's a huge untapped potential for not only the internet, but for mankind. And that excites me, to be part of a group of people who are on this mission together. My fantastic team in Yubico, the global open standards community, the tech giants that we are partnering with, that all of us can actually make a difference, and that the internet will be safer. That's awesome.
Love that. And before I let you go, something I always like to ask my guests is to add a song to our Spotify playlist for the Tech Talks Daily podcast. And I ask every tech leader if there's a particular song that has accompanied them throughout their career or just helps them get their head in the zone before going on stage or going into a big meeting. Is there a song that means anything to you that we can add to that playlist?
Yes, it's an English song. It is In the Air Tonight by Phil Collins. I've been on this standards journey now for 10 years, and I've always felt that it's coming. There are moments where I literally played that song for my team, like, hey, can't you feel it? Coming in the air tonight. And it reminds me to, continue, being on this journey, and it's just a little, few steps, and then the kingdom will be here. And I think it's a really cool song too, by the way.
Yeah, and you've got to play air drums to it too, right?
Yes, exactly.
Well, before I let you go, can you remind everyone listening of where they can find you online and contact your team if they've got any questions, or just find a little bit more information about the work that you're doing there? What's the best starting point?
Our website, yubico.com, yubico.com. I believe you'll find most of the information that you are looking for. Or you can just search our company and look at videos and case studies. There's a lot of things on the internet, on both the YubiKey and the FIDO Alliance standards efforts that we're driving.
Well, I'll add a video on the blog post that I used to promote this episode, just so people can see it in action. Because I'm conscious this is an audio podcast, so I will include a video where people can see it in action. I've loved hearing about the work that you're doing, the partnerships with FIDO Alliance, Google and Microsoft, etc. But also the story behind the company and Yubico's mission, which has always been just to make the internet a safer place for everyone. I think that's a beautiful moment to end on. So thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me and share that story today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.
So the big takeaway for me here is security keys reduce friction and complexity for users, especially when compared to the repeated insertion of one-time passcodes or similar security features. But again, I just love the mission there at Yubico to make the internet a safer place for everyone. And as I said a few moments ago, they've partnered with tech giants such as the FIDO Alliance, Google, Microsoft, all to develop an appropriate standards and realise this new vision that they have. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we reach that destination of going truly passwordless. Something I think we'd all love to have. It seems we've got more and more passwords, and whenever you switch to a new device, it can be a frustrating experience because nobody can remember passwords anymore. As someone recently told me, I don't need to remember my passwords because Apple and my thumbprint or my facial recognition remember them all. But take that away and nobody's got access to anything. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So please email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. My website is techblogwriter.co.uk. Keep those messages coming in. And I'll join you again tomorrow with another guest who we've already got lined up. So thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.